Hey there, I'm Cherie, and it's great to be with you today. This is Women Seeking Wholeness, a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are. We've got a treat for you today with Dr. Shetreat, and I'll get to her bio in just a moment. But just as a reminder to subscribe to this podcast and please share with your friends. I've got a really incredible 6-part series coming up on Mary Magdalene in July. So a lot of fun stuff leading up to that discussion, and a lot of diverse guests, authors, healers, speakers, teachers, just a great variety to learn from and glean from in that arena. Dr. Maya Shetreat is a neurologist, herbalist, urban farmer, and author of The Dirt Cure, which is Healthy Food, Healthy Gut, Happy Child. This has been translated into 10 languages, so very, very popular book. Lots of amazing content on keeping children neurologically, mentally, and emotionally well. She's been featured in the New York Times, the Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, the Dr. Oz Show, and more. But really, she's the founder, this is cool, of the Terrain Institute. She's an actual MD, but she teaches terrain medicine, which is earth-based programs for transformational healing. And I love that because it's also one of my passions to cultivate the gifts of Mother Earth to heal our bodies and our minds. She works and studies with indigenous communities and healers in Ecuador, and she's a lifelong student of ethnobotany, plant healing, and the sacred. We talk about in this discussion a lot of ancient knowledge of healing, sort of these rituals of daily life, and how we can come back to taking time to smell the roses and being really earth-based in terms of our nourishment. So this is a fascinating discussion with Dr. Maya Shetreat. Welcome, Dr. Maya. Does anyone just call you Dr. Maya, or is it does that feel weird to you?
No, actually, many people do. I used to have a hyphenated last name, but what's funny is actually that my full name, which is Dr. Maya Shetreat, a lot of people have asked me, did I change my name to have a goddess name?
I was going to say Shetreat sounds pretty yummy.
Yeah, it's funny. I when I was a kid, people used to kind of make fun of my name. So it's funny that suddenly people think I on purpose would have chosen that name, but somehow I guess I did kind of wind up with a goddess name. And yeah, but people do call me Dr. Maya, so you're welcome to do that.
Well, it's a powerful name. I know when you and I have talked in the past, just trying to see how we align. And we both have the same podcast producer, and that's kind of initially how we met. But as I started, as he recommended us to each other, I can see why now, because your work is, first of all, I don't have a medical degree. That's kind of where we part ways. But your work in the spiritual work around, the science and spirit of things of the earth and these indigenous therapies that have sort of withstood the test of time, these ancient modalities and practices. So that's where we align. And I really am convicted around plant chemistry and the power of, aromatherapy and, some of these really ancient, tried and true, saints and sages kind of use these therapeutically throughout time. So that's but I also align with you in your work with goddess body wisdom. So I would love for you to share with our listeners how you came. I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, like with your holistic and spiritual emphasis, and then becoming a medical doctor. And now it looks like you've kind of infused this whole science and spirituality around both being a human and having the science with that, and then the spirituality. So I would love to know sort of that metamorphosis for you.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think so many of us, maybe all of us, we come into the world with a very strong connection to the earth and to nature and to our bodies. I think as kids, it comes very naturally, and you can even see that, where you put a bunch of kids outside, they're going to be, making mud pies and
they're in it, like
rolling rolling down the hills on the grass and like making potions, with leaves and sticks and twigs and whatever kinds of things. And this is just very natural, I think, for most kids. And it definitely was for me. And I think what happens a lot of times is that we are, we're discouraged from that as we get older, because it's like, that's considered like kid stuff. And, kind of playing in nature and whatever, like, no, you have to get serious. That's not, how you should be spending your time. And I think, a lot of us end up kind of separating from that because we think we're supposed to be doing things that are serious. And, this like really has a lot to do with being in a kind of in this patriarchal model, which values kind of this very achievement oriented culture, like what go, do, achieve. And it's really not about being, receptive. It's not about taking time or stillness or appreciating what's around you, right? Those are very,
literally taking time to smell the roses.
Right. So being, that kind of receptive, aspect of our nature, right? We all have masculine and feminine aspects to each of us, whether we're men or women. And so a lot of us really live more in our masculine energy because that's what's valued in our society,
right.
And so I think for me, what happened was I was very connected to nature and the earth as a child, and I was very intuitive. And I used to spend hours by this creek that was, near my house in this suburban neighborhood. And I was an only child. So I didn't, I had to keep myself busy because, my parents, this was not, we're talking in the 70s. So parents were not like so concerned about occupying and keeping their children busy. It was like, we had to keep ourselves busy. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have computers in that same way. So we just had to keep ourselves occupied. And I kept myself occupied outside of the time I spent with friends. I read books, a lot of books, and I played outside by myself, And so I was like very connected to trees and plants, and I felt like trees were my friends and, animals. And when there were birds that were hurt, and I would want to rescue the birds. And that was kind of my life as a kid. And I stayed very connected to nature, I think. But, I ended up being I think I ended up getting steered into science and environmentalism and things that were not, that were more acceptable, in our society and less like, little like witchy behaviors, like what I did as a kid and what so many of us do. And so ultimately that took me on a journey into, basically becoming a doctor. I felt,
So that's not something that you just like dreamed about as a little girl, like I want to become a doctor someday.
Well, it's funny. My grandfather told me when I was probably, I want to say 4 or 5 years old, he said, when you grow up, you're going to be a doctor. And in my head, I remember then I was like, no, I'm not. and I really thought I was not. And I kind of, I kicked it around now and then because he was so certain I would. And I actually when I went to college, I became an English major. I was not a science major. And in my senior year, basically of college, I decided to become pre-med. And I took all my pre-med courses in my senior year of college. And I ended up going to medical school. So it's funny though, because what really interested me about going to med school was, or what kind of catapulted me into that, from this idea I was an English major and I wasn't going to go that way, was this special on TV I saw by Bill Moyers called Healing and the Mind. And it was an amazing series where he interviewed all these different people who did different kinds of mind-body medicine. And at the time, I think it was like Andrew Weil and Deepak Chopra and Rachel Naomi Remen, like a lot of kind of giants in the field. And one of the stories was about this little girl who had lupus, and she couldn't take her medication for lupus because it was causing her to have renal failure. But when they stopped the medication, she would have flare of her lupus. And so they decided to give her, with every dose of her medication, they'd give her castor oil because it had such a strong flavor and smell. And then they continued to give her the castor oil, but stopped giving her her medication. And her body continued to respond as if she was taking her lupus medicine. Mm-hmm. And which was right amazing. And they said, this is a field and it's called psychoneuroimmunology. And so I saw that special and I thought, that's what I want to do. That I would do, psychoneuroimmunology. I'm going to go to med school. I wrote my essay about this episode of the Bill Moyers Healing in the Mind special. They let me into med school somehow. And, and I went to med school, but once you go into kind of get sucked into that, nobody's talking about psychoneuroimmunology. Nobody's talking about mind body medicine. Nobody's talking about nutrition.
What does nutrition have to do with healing?
Well, or how you live your life, right? I mean, so none of these things, and in fact, doctors live the most unhealthy life throughout their entire training. That's part of the kind of initiatory process. So, plus during that time I got married and I had 3 children over the course of my med school, pediatrics residency and neurology fellowship. So by the end, I was, kind of indoctrinated into this, and I'd forgotten a little bit why I went in the beginning, and then my son got sick, my youngest son. And, this was sort of the basis of my book, The Dirt Cure. He started having all these breathing issues, and really through this 10-month period that was very scary, with breathing issues, neurologic issues, and so on, it turned out that he had a terrible allergy to soy. And that ended up immersing me in how food can affect our bodies, our guts, our brains, our nervous systems, development, all of these different things. And took me into the history of how food was grown and botanicals. And I ended up deciding, as I graduated from my neurology fellowship, because this kind of all coincided, I decided to go to the program for integrative medicine at the University of Arizona. And it's a 2-year kind of online fellowship with some in-person aspects. And I then decided to train to become an herbalist. And then they asked me to be faculty in that program. And so for the past 10 years, I have, been faculty as an integrative neurologist. And that's how I ended up practicing this way.
Wow. I love the term integrative neurologist. That's just so rich. It feels more of a wholeness paradigm as opposed to this compartmentalized way that we tend to regard, like diagnostics and fixing.
Well, right. And I think we are in this mindset in our culture, in medicine, but also, not in medicine, of we have to fix things, and we have to fix ourselves. And that, if you're sick, it means you're broken and something has to be fixed. And, I get in my practice all the time, parents who come with their kids, and they, their kids might have all different kinds of conditions. It could, anything from migraines to ADHD to seizures to autism to, really severe other developmental issues. And they come with this idea of they need to fix their kid. And it's really, and understandably, sometimes there are really, there's a lot of disruption going on, both in the child who could be suffering and the people around them. I mean, it's not that there's something so wrong with them kind of coming in and feeling that way. But a lot of times what I bring up is it's not your job, to fix your kid. We come together as a team to create to kind of understand why this is happening. It's not because something's broken inside of them necessarily, and it's not your job to fix that. That's something they themselves will fix in their own bodies, right? Because there's nothing we can create a healing environment, but ultimately, whether it's a child, an adult, whoever, it's up to them to heal, and we don't fix them. We just create an environment that is conducive to that.
That's so powerful. And you're reminding me of why I even got into holistic psychology, is because of my own sons. My son Noah, who's now 22, at the time was 14. So this is about 7-8 years ago, where he developed trichotillomania, which is, I'm sure you know, but for those who don't, it's obsessive hair pulling. It's basically untreatable. It's treatment resistant. And so I took it upon myself to be the one that would make this fixed, get this fixed. And what I've learned of, and he pretty much overcame it after a series of, but he is the reason that I got into studying about holistic medicine and quote unquote alternative forms of treatment, because I had to. The traditional ways were not meeting the deeper needs. But what I hear you saying also, and what I've learned the hard way, is it really isn't our job to fix anyone, much less our children, the closest people to us. It's to structure or maybe support the environment so the body can do what it was designed to do, and they could have their own healing experience.
Well, right. And I'd say two things about that. One is that it's so much pressure on parents, and especially on the moms that I see, to feel like they have to fix their kids, instead of really there are only three things we can do for our children. We can love them, we can advocate for them, and we can offer them resources. Those are the three things that we can do, and we can't do anything other than that. So this kind of pressure to say you have to fix your kid, which happens a lot because schools also, let's say, will say your kid's not behaving, or your kid's not functioning as they should be, or your kid's not, performing the way we expect. And they kind of put it on parents. Parents end up feeling like they're in some kind of, they end up feeling at odds with their own children, and like all this pressure to like fix their kids because of that.
Yeah.
And it's really unfair. And I think, I've had so many moms in tears when I've said, your job is to do these three things: love your child, advocate for your child, and offer your child resources. But it is not your job to fix them. And they're not broken, they may have to
because
heal.
and that's, yes. And I love it. I wrote this down. I'm going to shout it from the rooftops now and quote you, but we really can't. I remember my son sort of in my zeal to like fix him or even just to bring the resources. Number one, he was feeling overwhelmed. And number two, he was starting to see himself as broken at the core, or one who would always need fixed. And the light bulb sort of turned on maybe 5 years into this me of like taking him to specialists and doing everything along the integrative spectrum, where he was finally just like, Mom, okay, like I don't want to do any more weird stuff. And it was his way of saying like, I got this on a soul level. And now I look at him, and I don't know about your son, but my son, even though he may not have respiratory issues and whatnot, you mentioned your son had neurologic issues, but Noah's just wired a little bit differently and has more of a sensitive immunology. And so for me, it just became like, trust his inner wisdom and guide him. He is now, as a 22-year-old, like writing a novel. Going to writing groups. He has had to walk through hell in his own healing journey. He was actually diagnosed with a couple of things that he's resisted as like, that's not me. And I honor that. It's still not always easy to see your children struggle, but I think the hardest job as parents, and I'm sure even as professionals, is like, bring them to, you can't lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink, number one. And number two, like, there's only so much that we can do as a support team when it's their will and their soul journey at stake.
Well, and I think you actually are making the perfect point to lead into what my second thought about what you said was, which is my paradigm, or in my paradigm, I believe children are our teachers. So, on the one hand, we think we need to do so many things. We need to teach them. And of course, that's true on a certain level, but really on a deep level. And what happened with your son is a perfect example. My son's still, younger. And thankfully his health is much, much, much better. But he's also, I call him my cosmic magnet, because he is like, if something's going to happen, it's going to be with him. The world, he is very sensitive. He's very perceptive to what's going on around him.
Yep.
And he's also he's different in certain ways because he doesn't, he's not down with bullshit. He won't like, he's not someone who will fly under the radar, just like swallow stuff like so many other kids do. My other two kids are very aware when they're kind of, in kind of a BS situation. But they'll just lay low. You know what I mean? And this one of my kids, my third, he's not going to stand for that. So it means he's going to live, in a different way. And I feel like about children that they are, part of why, we sometimes think there's something wrong with them, besides that our society is just not always a very healthy place, right? Mm-hmm. So the environment around them and the kind of expectations made of them are sometimes just absolutely ridiculous. That's number one. And it sometimes makes them actually sick because it's just not healthy. Sometimes things that, ways that, like the food that's available or the environment they live in. I mean, there are real triggers for actual physical, emotional, mental, illness. But in addition to that, they're coming from the next world, right? They're here to live in the world beyond where we are. It's like a future world. And we don't always see that because they're the ones who are leading us there.
Right.
And so we have to really trust, in a sense, what these amazing kids who we think, there's something really wrong with them. But sometimes it's because they're teachers for us and they're showing us kind of how this world is going to evolve. And so,
and that's, I love that. And so I have 3 older kids and then 12 years and then 2 younger kids, 12-year break. It's a long story, but so I have a 22-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 17-year-old, and they are my teachers. And so what you said, really gave me the chills. Not only in this whole like health journey stuff and kind of navigating through like social issues, and then also just religious programming, because it's the way that they've inherited or that they were born into the structure, does not mean that it's their path. And so I have really just tried to listen. And that inner wisdom that I'm teaching about, like in retreats and purporting, that paradigm into, like you said, not the achievement paradigm, but more of or that patriarchal model, but more of that like intuitive model or nourishment model. And here I am teaching that. And then my own kids are like holding up their little hands going, hey, let me just tell you, this is my inner knowing. And so that has been a real learning experience for me, to just let them show me and to just let go and allow them their own learning and their own path.
Yeah. I think this is a really important lesson that each of us have to learn with our own children, really to do that, to let go and to trust. And, for me, I would say even a practical way, like my son is now he's in a student-led it's a school with a student-led curriculum, and they don't have teachers, they have facilitators, and they don't have classes, they have offerings. And, they create their own day every day, and they have goals and, all of that, but no tests. And, and this is a school where he's thrived, and he's learning so much about his social and emotional self. And that's been such a focus in middle school, which is kind of awesome, because I don't know what kids actually really learn academically in middle school. I just remember it was torture. So totally. I feel like, what an amazing opportunity that he gets to have that kind of experience. But there are times where I get attacks of anxiety over, well, should he be in a regular school, quote unquote, where he has tests and, regular homework? And what if he, and I go into all these things, and I'm like, trust him. I always kind of talk about him as like, he's one of my shamans, right? Because he is everything. He's always led me, right? He was the son who got sick, and led me back into integrative medicine and becoming an herbalist. He later on got sick again in a different setting. We had mold in our house, and it was like a whole ordeal. He was the one who got the sickest, and I had to really deal with it because he had gotten sick. And it took me on this journey into traveling to Ecuador and starting to learn with indigenous healers and elders. And since then, I've learned with many different kinds of healers that took me on my spiritual journey, that you kind of touched on in the beginning. And so each time, that I feel really challenged by him, I now try to remember he teaches these very high level lessons to me. And so I have to trust him. I have to trust his process.
Yes. And that is not an easy thing to do when you're so emotionally invested and you love them. Well, let's talk a little, now that you mentioned that, the indigenous work and the travel and sort of the spiritual exploration about medicine and plants and shamans. I know when you and I had talked previously, we talked about shadow work. Can you, just for like the lay person listening who may not understand like the path of the shaman, or sort of more of those indigenous sort of practices that, there's a whole culture of this, and it's not new. It's been around for millennia, really. But for just kind of like the lay person who may not understand shamanism or some of these more more of the mystery and the magic and science of that kind of thing, can you explain that a little bit?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that's a big question, but I'll.
I know it is. I know. I'm asking you to define it and not me.
Well, what I'll say is this, not even all that long ago, I would say probably, 500 or 600 years ago, there was really kind of the entire world still held a lot of indigenous knowledge and practice, pretty much on every continent, and certainly, least of all in Western Europe, but it was still very even present there, mostly with women, who were midwives and herbalists and wise women and elders who held this knowledge there, but also, in South America, in Africa, in Asia, all over the world, there's been this, and kind of each culture has had its own unique version of ancient knowledge. And that ancient knowledge is about healing, but in a different way than we think of like medicine now. Like there is a medicine aspect, which was based in plants, but it was also very much around rituals of everyday life and rituals of season and rituals of special events. And it included people's relationship with the earth was usually very central. And, the idea that the earth is filled with living beings, including not just animals, but also plants and even rivers and rocks and, forests had their own spirit, and they were considered as teachers to us, right? So they were actually considered to be intelligent in many ways beyond us and brought their own intelligence. And we were very lucky as humans to get to interact with all these kind of living beings and entities of the earth. Mm. And so this is kind of a model which is, still exists in a lot of tribal communities in, North America, in South America, and Africa. Still also brought even here by, when people were brought from Africa as slaves, that became part of like voodoo and hoodoo, these African religions that were earth religions that were integrated, let's say, into the culture here, the Black culture here, for example. So I won't speak as an expert on other people's cultures, and it is very, it's something that I've pursued and learned about, with my own teachers, and going back especially to my own roots, because my family comes from Morocco, and in I didn't originally know growing up, but that my family actually comes from the Berber tribes in Morocco, where my grandfather was actually a plant person. And the Berber tribe's still very connected to magic. So all over the world, there are still these pockets of people who are doing this work and living in this way. I wouldn't even call it this work, but living in this paradigm. And so I've been learning from different people, and especially, from a woman who is a PhD in ethnobotany and also a fourth generation shaman. She was sort of one of my first teachers in this journey. So, you asked about kind of the path or the journey of the shaman, or the calling, is what I would say. And what I would preface it with is there's a lot of, while these cultures can be so generous with their knowledge, there's also, a concern of people just coming in and kind of trying to take that knowledge and then, sort of appropriate it for their own and use it without being respectful of, the people who have taught it and the tribes that have held this wisdom and knowledge for all these millennia, as you said. And so that's something I always feel very careful about. Yeah. But I would say that when it comes to kind of this spiritual path where, we are kind of interacting with the earth in this way. And for me, it was something that I'd always been so deeply connected to as a child and as a young person. And it kept calling me back, but I had no real paradigm for how to work with it. And so what was so important to me when I kind of was immersed in this and really was traveling and learning from these teachers, was that it was so validating of these things that I'd always worked with and known existed, but I had no real words to describe it. Yeah. So it's a very, it's a whole different way of thinking about healing. It's a different way of thinking about our relationship with the earth and all of the living beings in the earth, and ourselves not as the most superior beings, which is kind of, I think, how we're, conditioned to think both, whether it be just in our general Western culture or even our, religions tend to kind of promote that idea, but really understanding that we're not necessarily superior at all. We come in and we're so lucky and blessed to be able to learn from all these other beings and be present and partake of this. And that, it's really a relationship where we're given so much and that we have to learn how to give back.
Absolutely. It's, we have, I have a lot of American frontiersmen or pioneering stuff in my blood. And I actually am related to one of the signers of the Constitution. And my stuff goes back into this whole, like, I live in the West and westward. And I never, even though I was raised running the hills of Wyoming, like I never was introduced to anything outside of what was dogmatic in terms of religion. And not to discount that, only that I really wasn't introduced to the ways of nature. And I was pulled into it of necessity, I would say, with my family history and some of the problems that we experienced with mental illness in my family lines. I love what you're saying about, working with nature in relationship, as opposed to we're the top of the food chain and everything below us is kind of there for the taking, as opposed to this more of a ritual or a ceremonial consideration of sacredness. And they all have their own spirit and they all have their own essence. And for someone like me, who's kind of operates more in a left brain place, it's become kind of a life goal of mine to just feel into the earth and listen and create connection there, because I know that's where the healing is. And even though I talk about natural modalities and I talk about using your senses and stuff, it really is because we are so technology based and everything's about connecting to a device. It's so easy to disconnect from nature. And if you do, you don't feel good. There's no other way to be well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's funny. I just was writing a proposal for my next book, and I got really immersed in it, and the weather was cold and I was sort of holed up inside on my computer constantly trying to put together this, book proposal. And, I am a little bit of an obsessive researcher. And so I was just sucked in. And because the weather was cold and I was busy and, I just, excuses kind of came up. I ended up really not getting outdoors as much as I usually do. And normally I trail run. So I make sure to get outside almost every day. And if not, I'm outside in my yard, I keep chickens, or I go into the woods, or, whatever it may be. And I was just really feeling so unhappy and disrupted. And I was really struggling. And then this was recent. It was in the last week. I went out for a run in the woods for the first time, actually in a couple months, which was a really long time for me to not have done that. And I came back and I felt so good. I felt so balanced, so nourished, so happy, and I was like, I can't believe I haven't been doing this, and that I've been just sitting and staring at this screen like it's the most important thing in the world. And we need that so badly. We need nature. Nature, is truly medicine for us, simply to be immersed in, the beauty of the forest, or just sitting outside on a rock, or putting our hands in the dirt. This is medicine. And there's a tremendous amount of science that supports the benefits. From immunological benefits to anti-cancer benefits, to sleep, to focus and attention and executive function and mood, all the things that you could possibly imagine that you would want to have going strong, you get simply by immersing yourself in the beauty of the forest or being in nature. And we sit and kind of do all these things we think are important, but we're not doing that. And it's that relationship that's so critical to our health, but also I think critical to the health of the earth. I think so many of us walk around with a tremendous anxiety over what is our future going to be with, this pillage, kind of that we've done of our planet. And a lot of people, whether it's about climate change or whether it's about, what's happening to different animals or clear cutting forests or whatever it is, I think everyone has this scared feeling about and dread about what might be to come. And for me, I think the answer, which is part of actually what I'm going to be talking about in my next book is, it's about, we have to get into relationship with the earth, being out in nature. And it's not just about, oh, let's be out in nature, but it's about having that relationship and understanding that in any relationship, you get to enjoy wonderful things about, the other member of the relationship, but also it's not just a one-way street, that we have to bring something. And in this case, I think it's gratitude. And really coming with a sense of appreciation and gratitude. And I think as we do that, that's what has to shift for everything else to shift. And I am very optimistic that if we do that shift of stepping into that place of gratitude, if enough of us do that, it's going to shift everyone else and everything else. But it requires us to show up for the relationship, which means at a minimum, like I don't talk about the earth like resources, or, the environment. It's about a true relationship with living beings, just like their family and friends. And in fact, there's so much data now really kind of proving everything does have its own spirit, right? Because there's so much on animal consciousness. Like animals have communities. They're incredibly intelligent. I mean, if you look up articles on the intelligence of crows and ravens, you will be blown away. And I have a online school, and in one of my courses there, I talk about animal consciousness and plant consciousness. And we cover the way crows actually have complex communities. They mourn for their dead. They remember faces of people, and they actually choose people that they like or don't like. If they don't like you, they will really bother the crap out of you. But if they like you, they will bring you presents, and not just bring you presents, but bring little shiny, nice things and put them in places they know you will find them. So it's so beautiful.
I don't know if you've studied much about Carl Jung, but he talks about the collective unconsciousness or collective unconscious and how we're all interconnected and all this depth around. I have actually had an experience within the last probably 6 months where I was in New Zealand, and I was talking to a healer and one of my business partners, and we were sitting in the healer's living room talking about a particular issue. And I looked outside, and there was a bird with a praying mantis in its beak. And I know there's lots of stuff on animal speak, and I know it's not all, it's not exact science, but sometimes these animals bring symbolism, like if they come to you in a dream or they show up right in front of you, like it's blatantly obvious. Well, when we looked at what praying mantis personified in that symbolism, and then this particular bird was indigenous to New Zealand. But what's interesting is, and we all got the chills. But then what's interesting is the next day I was sitting in my friend's extra bedroom, and I was just journaling that particular instance. And while I was journaling it, that exact same bird came to the windowsill where I was and looked right at me.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so interesting about that is I didn't have to go too deep to get the symbolism of this bird, and I didn't have to look at the species or anything. It's your time to fly. It's your time to set your soul free. I'm showing up for you to give you that spiritual permission. And it was like, oh my gosh, God is in that bird right now. Mm-hmm. Like that came straight from God. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about this collective unconscious and the interconnectedness, not only I believe, and I'm sure you would agree, that children are our teachers. I've been teaching for a while that animals are our teachers too, because no one lives in the present moment more than my dog. Nobody lives with more gratitude and presence than my dog. Mm-hmm. And she has shown up for me a lot. This dog, Molly, we've had her for almost 12 years, like as a teacher in being alive and companionship and just being present and finding joy in the most mundane things and forging connection. So I love that you're talking about plant and animal consciousness because, yeah, I mean, we have been pillaging and conquering for so long. Now it's time to get back to, and I think this is really the awakening happening right now on the earth of, and I'm sure you're a part of it, bringing people to the awareness around like, hey, it's right here. Everything we need for our healing, it's right in front of us.
Well, right. And so, I started kind of in the science model. And of course, the science, for me, science is just a language to describe magic. And I think that, we have science more and more that shows that, animals and plants and forests and all the things that we, knew 1,000 years ago or longer, are true. And somehow, it's a very hard awakening. I think it's going to be a very painful awakening on a certain level because we're going to have to face what we've been doing. And I think, I think it's going to be the hardest in a way for men because women have been a part of the pillage, like women's bodies and kind of women, women have kind of in this process have also been kind of treated, right? Like Mother Earth is really this divine feminine. And I know that you talk about the divine feminine, but I think like, women embody that in a certain sense. And we really connect with the rhythms of the earth through our bodies. Like we have these cycles that go with the moons and the tides and in many ways our bodies have been kind of controlled. And so has that happened with the earth, and the earth itself is very much an embodiment of the divine feminine. And I think ultimately this is going to be a shift and a change that's going to come through women, and maybe especially even, women of color who have been through this very kind of difficult and painful process. But certainly for all of us, we're going to have to create a shift. It's up to us to kind of take the leadership or lead the conversation, I think is what I would say, and really not wait for necessarily agreement, but just start to make the changes. And I think that like politically that's kind of been happening because we're seeing more and more women and more diverse women, even, in like Congress, for example, which is just interesting because this is kind of this, I think it's part of this awakening of the divine feminine, is that women from all different cultures and backgrounds are coming together and beginning to, use our voices and lead the conversation. And that is what's needed now, is this, representation of the divine feminine energy through each of us. We each have a role and we each have a gift, whether it is to be in politics, whether it is to be a healer, whether it is to be an artist, whether it is to be a mother and to raise our girls in a certain way and our boys in a certain way so that they can connect like in the ways that they need to, like my son and like your son, where they're not kind of being shoved into this kind of toxic model that's wrong for them. So for me, a lot of our mission now and what our collective calling is to really connect with that, collective unconscious, as you were mentioning, that Carl Jung talks about, but really to also not just connect to it, but then to take action in whatever way is authentic to us. And I think that's going to be, I'm feeling that coming very, very quickly and in a very strong way. And I'm seeing it happen. Like there's sort of this collective awakening happening of this divine feminine in all of us.
Yes, men and women and children alike, and the earth. And the earth, I'm sure you would agree with me on this. It's the actual earth, not some ethereal divine feminine presence necessarily, but the actual earth that holds more of that energy than anything else. It's so present with us, from gravity to the nature elements to that nourishment. And I think the inclination to disconnect, the further we get away from that, the further we get away from our own self-identification as well as our own healing. I love what you said about being shoved into toxic models of healing, because that's happened to all of us. And I certainly respect the medical field. I know it saves lives. And I think what I'm hearing from you is, because you've been on both sides of those models, but now you're more into that middle, the marriage, if you will, of the science and spirit and the integrative approach. Just as a final takeaway, because I know our time is kind of wrapping up here. What, given every topic we just addressed, which was pretty vast, do you have any parting thoughts around, just at kind of of course we're going to, you're working on a book, you've already published a book on the dirt cure. So you're very much into this, bringing people practical solutions. Is there anything that you could leave with us as a parting thought or thoughts around what we can practically do to connect in or to find healing from the earth?
I think the most important way to begin, or important for even those of us who know, but need to remember and be reminded of what we should be doing, is just to take time each day or as often as possible to be quiet, and just to stop and not do anything, and especially to do that out in nature. I think that is the key, number one, most important practice that we can do, because of the story you told, actually, right? Of that bird. You were able to see these messages that were coming to you that are like poetry, right? I mean, because it's not like the bird came and spoke with its little beak and said, this is what you need to do.
It wasn't a Dr. Dolittle moment.
Right. So what you did, though, was you perceived something. And look, some people might say that was on your head, and that's fine too, because you got an important message.
Well, except for that, it was way too coincidental. And I felt the alchemy of my heart exploding.
Right. But I'm saying other people, not me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But, people who are not necessarily, in this paradigm, they might have whatever they have to say about it. But the point is that, in my paradigm, and I think in your paradigm, these messages are coming to us all the time from this earth wisdom that we are so lucky to have access to and to be immersed in. But we have to show up. And that is the only way that we can receive those messages without them having to come and take like a baseball bat to our head, which can be like big, stressful and difficult events sometimes happen to awaken us to our purpose. Right. And, we didn't get too much into that topic, but instead I would say, if you take a little bit of time every day to be quiet and receptive and maybe hopefully alone, and to hopefully be able to do that out in nature, or at least in some connection with nature, you just open up that channel, and you will be stunned at the kinds of messages and, let's say, awarenesses that will float into your head and that will arise, and teachings without you having to do anything at all. So that is my parting
I
piece
love
of
it.
advice.
I love it. And just the effortless way that those messages can come, that you don't have to find them, they'll find you, which is the way of mother.
Yeah.
She's always there. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Maya Shetreat. And I am going to encourage people. Can you give us your website? So
Sure. Yeah, it's Dr. Maya, DRMAYA.com. And I actually have a free gift there for people who are listening, an earth medicine bundle where you can have all kinds of practices, meditations, and different practices around grounding, and lots of different things that I've learned available to you for free if you want that. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm pretty active there.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing with us your wisdom, and we will definitely continue the conversation on a deeper level as I pick your brain further down the road.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I loved how Dr. Shetreat referenced science as just a language to describe magic. And what is magic? Like, we all just want to live this magical existence, this beautiful, the thing of legends, the life of the legends. What she shares is so powerful because we can have a truly beautiful existence if we focus on our senses and we come back to utilizing the gifts of the earth to feed, nourish, cleanse, and restore our sensory portals. Continue to stick with me in our Women Seeking Wholeness Facebook community as we ramp up to talk more about these and other topics. And I just got back on Instagram. It's something I let go of for a while, and I'm back on. So you can check me out there on Cherie Burton, Women Seeking Wholeness. Have a fabulous day, and we'll catch you next week.